Hey everyone, we are going to finish up the amendments today, going through the 8th Amendment, but I just wanted to make sure that we go back through and we review that we have talked about 4th Amendment. When we did the 4th Amendment, we were talking about how that is the amendment where we're going to get the evidence. If there is a crime, this is where we will do the searching and the seizing of evidence. And then we go into the accused phase, and that is, again, person is just accused of a crime. That is the protection against self-incrimination. That is the protection of due process, being treated fairly and equally under the law. That is protection from double jeopardy, and the grand jury procedure. 6th Amendment, as we covered in our previous lecture, is dealing with the criminal trial. And the one thing that I really want to make sure we point out is that all of these items in the 6th Amendment happen within a courtroom. So when we look at the speedy and public trial, that takes place in a courtroom. When we look at a jury, those are in a courtroom. Witnesses and evidence are presented from either the prosecution or the defense side. That all takes place in a courtroom. So I want to make sure that you get that part down, because that will actually help you when it comes to the quiz. And so what we're going to finish up today is the 8th Amendment. And remember, these go in order. You can't punish someone until they've been convicted in a trial. The trial is of an accused, and nobody can be accused of a crime if there is no evidence. So they do go in that order. So what we're going to cover today is the 8th Amendment. Even though it looks small, it is kind of a lengthy amendment to cover. It's broken into the two parts, which deals with the fine and the bail, and then the cruel and unusual punishment. So we're going to start with fines and bails today. And so, first of all, the question of what is bail. And this isn't very big, so I'm going to get that font size increased. Bail is an exchange of something of value for freedom between court dates. So when we look at bail, it's collateral. If you need to have a pen, or you want to borrow a computer charger, and I want my computer charger back, I may ask you for something of value, so that I will take something of value from you in exchange for something of value from me. So when somebody is potentially going to be held in custody between court dates, the thing of value for them is the ability to not be confined in jail between those court dates. So they will exchange something, and in this particular case, what we're looking at in something is the money. Now, when we look at bail and what is considered extreme or excessive or fair in terms of setting bail, there's a lot of things that are taken into consideration when bail is determined. And so a couple of those things that I want to make sure you get written down is, when bail is considered, one of the first things they will consider is, what is the crime? Are we talking about minor theft? Are we talking about violent assaults? Are we talking about property crimes? So a judge will take those into consideration. Then the next thing the judge is going to take into consideration is whether or not the person in question, the accused, is a flight risk. Does this person have a chance of not returning? Is the money not of major value to them that they're going to take off between court dates and not return for their next court date? The judge will take into consideration the safety of self and others. If we release this person beyond court dates, is this person going to be a threat to the victim? Is this person going to be a threat to themselves? And so they will take all of this into consideration. And one of the other things they'll take into consideration is the ability to pay. Does this person have the ability to actually pay the bail? Now, in Minnesota, generally what they look at is that whatever the bail amount is, 10% of that amount, whatever is set, has to be in cash, and the rest is in something of value. So one that makes me think of from a few years ago is an individual who was, boy, but I cannot type. He was, bail was set at $500,000, I think, and so he had to come up with $50,000 in cash. And then his mother put her house up as the value of the rest of it. So if he didn't return to his court date, not only would he lose that 10%, that $50,000 in cash, she would have also lost her home, since she put that up as the something of value to equal the amount of the bail that is set. Now, when we look at We've seen in situations where the prosecution says, I want this much for bail, and the other side says, well, that's ridiculous. We do have the extremes. And so on one extreme, the prosecution may request that the defendant be remanded. And remanded simply means held without bail. So there actually is no bail, that this person is a flight risk. This person committed such a horrible crime that they shouldn't even be out on bail, or they do pose a risk to themselves or to others. So that is on one extreme. On the other extreme is what they will refer to as, and I'm going to see if I can't get this in some big letters for you, is what we refer to as ROR. And ROR is an acronym for release on own recognizance. And I know that's really small, so I'll rewrite it here. Release in white font really doesn't help you any. Release on own recognizance. And what this essentially means is that they shouldn't have to put up any money. And I keep doing that. And why do I keep doing that? We're referring to $0 because they can be trusted. Release on own recognizance simply means on their word. You can believe me on my word that I will return because I said I will. So I'm not going to put up any money. So the extremes on this is prosecution side held without bail. Okay, don't put up any money. They can't be released, to the point of you don't have to ask them for money as something valuable because they can be trusted on their own word. And anything in between. So when we're talking bail. Now on the other side, we look at fines, and fines are determined based on statute, based on what the law says. And so when we looked at petty misdemeanors and gross misdemeanors the other day, we were looking at what amount is the top amount that can be expected in a fine for these crimes. And so the first one is the petty misdemeanor, and that is a maximum of $300. Minnesota state law says that anything over $300 is considered excessive for this type of crime. So when we get over to the misdemeanor, the maximum on that one, if we go back and look, is $1,000. So somebody found guilty of a misdemeanor in Minnesota, that would be the maximum amount that our state would recognize as a legitimate fine. And then finally, we have the gross misdemeanor, which is the $3,000 maximum in those fines as well. So when we go back to the 8th Amendment and we look, excessive fines and bails, the fines we just talked about, and then bails, the idea that I'm going to put up some money so that I'm not held in custody between my court dates. Now, the second part of the 8th Amendment is the cruel and unusual punishment. Now, that has been debated for, well, as long as we've been a country, as to what constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. And we have had the Supreme Court deal with a number of specific situations in which they have to decide, does this constitute cruel and unusual based on community standards. Now, based on community standards can differ depending on what state you're in, so that kind of helps us understand why some states have the death penalty and what we call capital crimes, and some states like Minnesota that does not have the death penalty. And so when we look at the death penalty in the United States, there are still 5 forms of execution that are still allowed in the United States that our Supreme Court has determined are not considered cruel and unusual punishment. One is the lethal injection. 2, and I'm getting in the way here of other words, and I'll move this over just a little bit, is the gas chamber, which you're going to see a video here on in just a second. The third one is electrocution, which some states still have, and I think one of the videos might actually talk about this. A fourth one is hanging. Now, the thing with hanging is the state that, Delaware, I think, is the state that still has this. Delaware has never taken the law out, which means since it's still in legislation, it is still a possible form of execution, even though they haven't used it for a long time. And number 5 is firing squad. And that one is actually considered one of the more humane ways. And we're going to look at a case where the firing squad was used. So when we look at these, one of the things that I wanted to point out is most states have the lethal injection. And we're going to watch a video in here where there was a issue in Oklahoma where there was a botched execution with lethal injection, which has actually caused it to become a more questionable form of execution versus the other ones. And so you're going to watch a video on the gas chamber. You're going to watch a video on the firing squad, lethal injection, and then there's a new one that's out there actually that people are starting to question. And you're going to watch a video that is from a Law and Order episode dealing with solitary confinement, where an individual is put in a single cell, a lot of times where it is light regulated, meaning the lights are not natural lights, they'll be artificial lights, and they're never turned off, and they may be sound resistant cells as well. So the person may end up going in for anywhere from a few hours to could be years, and what that solitary confinement does to someone's mind. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is a video on incarceration. And the video is actually from the sentencing of former Officer Kim Potter when she was sentenced for the killing of Dante Wright. And Judge Chu, who gives the sentence, goes through, and I'd never seen a judge do this before, but Judge Chu goes through and she explains what are the reasons to incarcerate. And she talks about deterrence, incapacitation, retribution, and rehabilitation. And she's going to give really quick definitions of these, and I'm going to ask you to write those down because I really think it's important that we know why do judges choose to incarcerate. And when we talk about incarceration, we're talking about a loss, goodness, I cannot type, a loss of freedom. And so why would a judge make a decision to take away somebody's freedom from them and put them into a facility where they just cannot come and go at their own free will? And so when you watch the video, I want you to get the definitions down as best you can in terms of what is deterrence, what is incapacitation, what is retribution, and what is rehabilitation. And I also want you to determine, what does Judge Chu identify as the reason she gave Kim Potter prison time? One of these applies, 3 of them don't, and I want you to determine which one applies and which one doesn't. So when we look at the 8th Amendment, as I said before, it's not a very long amendment, but there is a lot of information that goes into this. So it goes back to finishing up this evidence, accused, to a trial, to the punishment phase, all in order. And again, all of these little tidbits will be on the amendments test that you will be taking here shortly. So if you have questions, just jot them down and we will cover them here in a bit.